welcome to the Explore the Circular Economy show by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, where we talk, discuss, debate, investigate the transition away from a linear take-make waste economy to one that designs out waste and pollution, keeps products and materials in use, and regenerates natural systems. My name is Seb. I'm the co-host of this show and part of the learning team here at the Foundation. And today I'm joined by a guest co-host. Who are you?
Hello, I'm Tansy. I'm part of the editorial team at the Foundation.
Welcome, Tansy. And for any of our viewers who are watching who aren't familiar with the different regions of the UK, Tansy is from the north of the UK. So for anyone who thinks the north is just something from Game of Thrones, the north is also very prototypically represented by the way Tansy speaks. So do listen to her carefully during the next half hour.
Absolutely.
And so it's a real pleasure to introduce our guest today, who is Joss Blériot. The Joss is actually part of the foundation when it was founded in 2010 and has has worn many hats during that time. He's currently the executive lead and has been for a while of institutions, governments and cities that work in policy especially. Welcome, Joss.
Thank you, Seb. I thought you were going to make a comment about my many hats being the cause of my loss of hair.
You're not wearing a hat today?
I'm not, no. Very observant of you.
Well, thank you for getting involved in the conversation, Joss. We're really looking forward to discussing this. And I think to start, obviously alongside the health implications of COVID-19, the pandemic has revealed a lot of vulnerabilities in our economic system, and it's highlighted the need for a more resilient economic model. So I thought we should start maybe by talking about those exposed vulnerabilities before we discuss how they could be mitigated. So what areas in particular do you see that have been particularly exposed at this time?
Yeah, I think that what we've seen is really the typical efficiency-driven systems being challenged by the fact that once something is super optimized, if there's a small disruption, the whole system can actually collapse. So it might be a bit dramatic to frame it this way, but the fact is that when it comes to availability of parts for medical equipment, that's been very stringent. When we've seen disruptions in the food system as well, very hastily implemented lockdowns in cities leading to shortages, and the fact that the system relies on centralized production, centers of production that are sometimes quite far away. They're concentrated as well, and they rely on transport and open borders and the fluidity in the system. And all of this, of course, we knew it's not something that comes out of the blue. It's just that the crisis, because it was very sudden and it took a lot of people by surprise, really brought them to the center stage. So circular economy certainly has a lot to offer in that context, but it's also really important to note that that debate and that discussion was pre-existing the crisis. It doesn't come as a revelation. The need for a system reset was established. Policymakers and businesses alike had taken it on board, started investing in it. And I think the job now is to say, okay, within the circular economy solutions framework, what are the most relevant, what are the most promising solutions to the crisis that we have at hand?
I actually think you said something quite profound there, Joss, in the sense that it's good to observe, or useful to observe, that our economy is kind of based on efficiencies of scale almost, and in some ways you said we're all kind of aware of it, but sometimes we're not as actively aware of it as we might be, in the sense that that does make things that those efficiencies are also quite fragile, and COVID or the pandemic is kind of a revelation of that, or it just reveals what already existed and we already know about. I want to just so you mentioned a little bit that we're going to talk a little bit more in this conversation about building back better, or like the some of the conversations that are beginning to happen about how investment in things like the circular economy might be reinvigorated. But it's also worth saying there's quite a lot of momentum has been building up already to this point on the circular economy. That's existed before March. I don't know if you want to just say a little bit about some of the things we've already started seeing in terms of energy behind the circular economy transition.
Yeah, sure. And one of the big announcements around circular economy this spring was, of course, the publication of the European Circular Economy Action Plan, which is actually the second one. And the whole process started in 2012 with the European Resource Efficiency Platform. We're almost coming up to 10 years of building up to that, 10 years of economic rationale, 10 years of businesses and pioneering front runners investing in those solutions, seeing the economic attractiveness, seeing that model as a way to bring competitiveness, and seeing this model as a way to reignite creativity through design strategies, new business models, etc. So that conversation was already taking place, and the fact that the Commission published the Circular Economy Action Plan in the middle of the pandemic is absolutely only an accident. All of this was on the menu already. So I think it's really important, because building on that established logic means that there's less of a ambiguity building around, oh, should we put this on the back burner because actually there's a more pressing matter? No, it is the matter. It's at the heart of the transition. So some elements may be more relevant than others, and that's fine. We can find the most adapted ones, the ones that bring about the most obvious and immediate benefits. But the logic of that system reset was sound and is sound now. And some of it is even more relevant than ever.
And so, sorry, go on, Tansy.
Sorry. Yeah, so, it's become more relevant than ever. And obviously we've seen a lot of brittleness in supply chains. I wonder if we can dive a little bit deeper into circular economy and what solutions it might provide to make those supply chains less brittle and support businesses as they transition.
Yeah, I think if we go back to the example of manufacturing and take the medical equipment as an example, lack of availability of spare parts has been a critical point. The fact that some outlets did have the theoretical capacity to repair some of that stuff, remanufacture it and make it more available. And talking about ventilators for one thing. The fact that some products were actually designed in a way that makes them really hard to either refurbish, repair, or remanufacture totally hinders the efficiency of the system. And when there's a crucial need for those spare parts, and those spare parts are made on the other side of the world, and there's no way for them to get to the users, then we have a big problem, a life and death question, actually, in many cases. So the logic of saying, we're going to look at design as a strategy that makes the spare parts available, that makes repurposing easy, that makes shifting one production facility from making one specific product to another one. And we've seen that with the automotive industry. Some companies have started making ventilators because they were flexible, they were adaptive, they had that kind of modern production tool. And of course, that's only one example, but it means also that if you have a whole industry that is built on those principles and that can adapt, it creates value in the long run. You can shift your production. You can really be in tune with the needs and the constraints of the economy as it evolves. And it means that you're not relying on one product alone. Some companies only make one spare part for one type of equipment, and these things are really risky. I mean, in terms of risk, and any financial analysts will look at this and completely freak out if you think that your model relies on getting one type of product to one user alone. Then of course you're extremely exposed. If the efficiency of the system, which is great, by the way, and to go back to your point, Seb, we tend to forget that it's brittle because when it works extremely well. So we get that sense of security as well. But investing in design strategies and production strategies that enable that repurposing, that enables the second principle of the circular economy to effectively be implemented, which is keeping material and product in the system in order to safeguard A, the ability of the economy to function, and B, that resource, that feedstock, keeping it available at high quality means that you also displace the need for new virgin materials, and that in turn displays the negative externalities associated with their production.
And I guess as a reminder to audience in this throughout this conversation, we're kind of sharing perspectives here. We don't have all the answers. We don't, this isn't a future gazing exercise. This is just a point of view based on the research we've done historically on circular economy and some of the things that we're beginning to see and some of the conversations we're beginning to have now. And with that in mind, Joss, my question would be, what are some of the kind of immediate opportunities or obligations even to build a circular economy in the aftermath as we start to see now serious signs of countries and economies coming out of the kind of lockdown phase of the pandemic?
Yeah, well, I think that it's been picked up by policymakers, and because, of course, the situation means that the role of government is increased because there is a need for rescue packages and big intervention, given the scale of the issue. But things around making sure that the industry can still work and is able to be adapted and flexible is really critical. Making sure you have food systems that are a bit relocalized, that are more focusing on the actual practices, and making sure that you have an agricultural system which is decentralized. That means that the access is possible, that you don't necessarily rely on workforce that comes from abroad seasonally, which at the moment it can't happen. So there has been a lot of worry around the fact that some of this season's crops is going to be lost simply because there's no one to pick them. So looking at all these strategies that mean you have a more adaptive, resilient system at regional, local, municipal level, which doesn't mean that, of course, it's the end of globalization. It's just a different one. It's having those nodes of circularity that build the resilience and still rely on these international exchanges when necessary. But when the international system is challenged, that means that your economy can still continue functioning. And that might be a question of now investing in R&D for the right materials. The circular economy needs circularity compatible materials as well. And that's an innovation prospect. It can be about looking at the building stock, the existing building stock, and saying there's a need for renovation anyway. Why don't we focus on this? Invest in circular economy strategies for the renovation of the housing stock, which, by the way, of course, de facto is a local activity. You can't offshore that. You can't send the building away to be refurbished somewhere else. So all of these things are coming to the are rising in prominence, and they've been picked up on by policymakers and businesses alike. When you see, for instance, and I'm going back to this example because it's probably the best documented one, but that the remanufacturing of medical equipment is a market that is set to grow by 10% each year. This is staggering. There's a massive economic opportunity, and that logic can be applied to automotive, heavy industry, big equipment, but also to electronics. If we have that facility and that capability on our doorstep, if these things can be taken apart, refurbished, recovered, and then properly repurposed or upgraded where the actual users are, that means that you cut some of the risks associated with the global supply chains as well. So it's finding the right balance between keeping a healthy global economy and making sure that you have more resilience nationally, regionally, locally.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and you picked up on the food system when you were discussing the different examples there. And I think obviously food has been highlighted as a system that we really need to be flexible. We need it to work for people, particularly at this time. So I wonder if we could talk a little bit more about that system in particular and how circular economy could help to create a more resilient, shock-proof food system, but also how some strategies that are emerging from the pandemic policies like the Farm to Fork initiative in the EU and also some business commitments that are kind of coming out of all of this, how that system might change in the near future to be more resilient.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's an emotional topic and people are very close to it. And to go back to what Seb was saying, we always also tend to forget sometimes that the efficiency as we know it and the big decentralized productions, that means that everything's available anytime. We started questioning that as well. And people, and a lot of opinion polls, especially in the UK, have shown that actually people have grown more attuned to where the stuff that they eat comes from, how it's been produced, and its impact on the ecosystems as well. And it kind of was interesting at the beginning of the lockdown, people marveling at the fact that biodiversity and nature was coming back to claim the land in a way. And it made a lot of people feel really good. But then if you couple that with the fact that there's a big worry about the impact of the food we eat has on the environment, you think that there's more, the idea is more palatable to a lot of people. So regenerative agriculture that actually invests in ecosystem health as well, that builds natural capital in line with the third circular economy fundamental principle, is really key. Because if you're going to have food production on your doorstep because it makes more sense, you also want that production close to you to be conducive to a better environment. You don't want necessarily a big industrial farm just in order to have your milk every morning. There's something which is bringing the production and consumption aspect of the system much closer to people's mind. And that resonates with ideas that have been pushed forward. You mentioned the Farm to Fork initiative, which looks at the rise in percentage of organically farmed land, but also reduction of pesticides. And that was in the pipeline before COVID happened, but it made it even more a center of interest. Suddenly people start feeling passionate about this. And so all of these things actually, which were really good ideas to begin with, they resonate even more. And also regenerative agriculture, by the way, which means that you're going to close those nutrient cycles, that you're not going to have runoffs, you're going to use less fertilizers, less water, but also you're able to sequester carbon in the soil. And that's the beauty of all these strategies, is that they are conducive to a low carbon economy as well. It's not a question of saying, do we now prioritize COVID recovery at the expense of the fight against climate change? All these strategies are conducive as well. It's a double win. And that's where really the systemic shift is gaining traction, because it's not a trade-off.
And there's an article we've written out. A member of our team has written an article on our blog platform Medium, Circulate News, medium.com/circulate news, on exactly this topic of how do we build a healthy and resilient food system in this context. And I guess, like, we've talked quite a bit about this kind of efficiency, resilience thing. The point, of course, is that underneath everything within our economy is this take, make, waste, throughput system, and that's what's being made efficient. And one of the things I think interesting that you kind of have come back to a couple of times, Joss, is the fact that in the efficiency of take, make, waste, the role of most people is quite limited to well, they're described as kind of consumers. Of course, we actually know that most things you don't consume. I don't consume my laptop, for example. And it sounds like actually this kind of local agenda is also, you've talked about this kind of notion of it being kind of empowering for people. They're not just end of pipe consumers when we start thinking about these networks of localized supply chains. So there's something quite exciting about that, as outside of all the pandemic conversations. Wanted to move on to a slightly different tack, which is that with governments intervening in the economy more than they usually would, suddenly there's huge amounts of government intervention. In what ways can policymakers enact on a larger scale? What can they do, and also what does that mean for some of these really big agendas? You alluded to already to, it's not about abandoning climate change. That's perhaps a concern that people would say, well, now we're focused on how do we reignite the economy, how do we bump ourselves out of a recession, and that might see an abandonment of some of these environmental agendas, the Paris Agreement, European Green Deal, environmental economic agendas.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's a lot to unpack. But I'd go back to your first point about the role of the citizen, because it links to something which is very important as well, as the role of cities in all this. And it's been obviously rising in importance, cities as a political force, cities as a massive source of GDP globally, and cities as economic powerhouses with creativity and all the interconnectedness of all systems. So actually they provide a really good way into circular economy strategies. And the fact that people have been locked down and remain within the boundaries of their neighborhoods means also that they have felt empowered to take part in repair activities, repair cafes, local food production. All of that movement has been in a way legitimized, and people feel that they can express, that they can contribute to the economy. And the inclusiveness that it brings is actually great, because it has been felt for a long time that the economy was happening somewhere else. It wasn't part of society, or it was presented that way. And that leads to a lot of frustration. But once you turn that around, and as a city, and the C40 has been a brilliant group, leading on climate change and really taking those circular economy ideas to the fore. I was listening yesterday to an address by the mayor of London, quoting circular economy as a key strategy in bringing London to net zero carbon. And it really is a revelation for a lot of people within their own cities who have a repair cafe on their doorstep, who want to take part in those activities, that they can actually contribute creatively to the economy. Now, to your second question, the size of the recovery stimulus packages is staggering, and it's really important to make sure that the investments will be in line with that economy of the future that a lot of countries, again, and policymakers have started to put on the table, either through the establishment of national circular economy roadmaps or legislation, or commitments to the Paris agenda that hinge on industrial strategy. We see the climate change has always been traditionally, and for the right reasons, has always been pitched as an energy generation and consumption issue only. But we've shown in our latest paper, with the help of our partners, Material Economics, last September, that actually production and consumption represent 45% of GHG emissions as well. So if your industrial renewal strategy is conducive to low carbon in the first place, then it means that you can take circular economy as an argument within your Paris Agreement commitment and include it in those policies. And the integration of all this means that you have a much more powerful, integrated, very clear tool in order to get where you want to get to, which is an economy that thrives in the long term and relies less and less on the consumption of finite resource, including fossil fuels. So there's another question that was in a way contained in that first one, Seb, which is recovery packages for certain industries. Do we run to save them regardless of how they operate, or do we put conditionality provisions on the recovery packages as well? And in certain cases, we've seen states saying, okay, we'll bail out this specific industry, but this comes with a need for a commitment to move to either more circular, regenerative, low carbon practices. So there is a way to shift the system as well through that recovery and that safety net.
Do you think from that point of kind of, building these recovery plans, that it might actually change how governments and how societies perceive growth in the economy and how success is perceived? And has the pandemic, I guess, changed how all of us think about the economy? Or I know that's such a huge question and not like a simple answer, but it's a big period of change. So does that mean we can have bigger changes going forward?
Well, I'm not sure I can answer that. But what's certain is that all of these big shocks tend to put things in perspective. And one way to put the world in perspective is to look at what we value and what values underpin growth as we know it. And I think the question has been made much more relevant, is blind volume-based consumerism actually the way forward? The question has been put on the table for sure, and we've seen that things that we don't have access to and we thought that we would miss massively, actually we don't. We see the benefits of moving away from certain practices. There's definitely a societal reassessment of a few priorities. By the same token, I think it needs to be important. It needs to be said as well that a lot of people are suffering massively at the hand of the economic impact. It's crisis that has disastrous health, personal consequences, economic consequences. So there's a legitimacy behind the idea of making sure that the economy is propped up really quickly as well. The question is how. So it can't be only a pure academic, intellectual, values-based debate, but for sure, once the economy is picking up, questioning the way it should go, given its constraints, and also given the services that it actually gives to the citizens in general, the place of business, and a lot of businesses and a lot of prominent businesses in our network have been saying this for a long time. We need to reassess the actual place of companies in society and what they can bring in it. And if they don't contribute anything positive, then they should be asking themselves really big questions. And by wanting to contribute, then of course you start to question your practices and you say, what's the impact? Can I make a positive impact? Can I contribute to the regeneration of ecosystems, to better cities, to better conditions for citizens in general, and products that actually deliver a service and are in a way valorizable, that can be invested in the future, etc. Do we give an outlet to create people's creativity? All of these are really big questions that, of course, have been made even more prevalent by the crisis. Now, giving an answer to that is obviously impossible. Future will tell. All we can do is show that there is traction, that there is a benefit, and that's what we strive for at the foundation.
We've had a couple of questions in from the audience watching online. Thank you so much for sending those in, and do keep commenting in the various places where you're watching this show. A couple sort of asking, I think, for kind of clarification around that 45% number that you gave, Joss, because actually, ever since we published that paper, that's quite a surprising stat for many people. I think that fossil fuels to renewable energy, that's what kind of emissions are all about. What do we mean in like a, I'm not asking for the 100-page report version of this because we've only got 3 minutes left, but what are some of the things that come under that kind of, what are the things that sit outside the energy transition, the 45%?
Well, I saw the production, the emissions associated with the production of the goods and the food that flow through the economy, basically, to give you a really short answer, footprint of industry, of use as well. But the main idea is to say 55% is energy systems. It's about heating. It's about providing the energy to the domestic, etc. But also the emissions that are generated by the stuff that we make, that we then market, that we put at the disposal of the consumers, and that eventually get discarded, and the food that flows through the system, all of that accounts for 45% of global GHG emissions. There is a very simple slide on our website, and maybe we can share the link later on. It's in the completing the picture report in the publication section of our website, and the actual graph, the pie chart that gives you a breakdown of the sectors is very clear on that one.
And let's see if we can squeeze in one more question. I'm looking at the top of my screen at the time as we eke away our finite time. There's a kind of like there's a big picture question from YouTube. I'm putting you in a position here, Joss, where I respect that there's no way that you can possibly answer this question in the time that we're giving you, but I feel like we've talked about it a little bit already, so maybe it's reiterating some points. But the question is it time to move towards a circular society? And what they follow on to say is, how might we put resilience and hope into sort of practical plans and investments at scale, a city scale, for example?
Yeah, I like the fact that you respect that I won't be able to address this, because I won't. But again, it's really reiterating the intentions that were already out there before that crisis, that a system reset is necessary on many, many fronts, because we have constrained resources, because the negative externalities and the impacts of economic activity as we know it can't run in the long term, because it doesn't deliver what it should in terms of either well-being or ecosystem services or general, building a positive model society in which the economy is included and to which people can feel they participate, they have a role in, and that they can express their creativity for the greater good is, of course, more important than ever. And again, all of this is contained in a lot of plans going forward. You know, it's really great to see that some countries which have had their share of challenges, I'm thinking of Chile here, for instance, who couldn't be a host for the COP25, but had signaled really great intentions, is forging ahead with their national circular economy roadmap, despite of the challenges that they face, because that they see that you need to have an outlook on what things are going to look like after this. There will be an after, and we're moving towards it. The question is, what sort of after do you want? And if you build it with a sense of positive direction in mind, then of course it's going to be even more inspiring for people to take part in.
Well, thank you very much for making some time to share some points of view with us today, Joss. Thank you to our listeners at home. I guess I mean, a lot of people talk about COVID-19 being something that accelerates certain trends, and I guess we're going to see over the next few months whether that's actually what happens. But certainly it feels like the thrust of this conversation is that the circular economy was already building significant momentum beforehand amongst the business community in terms of the business case for transition, and increasingly at an international and policy level. And there are clearly some signs and case to be made that that is something that should accelerate out of the transition as well. So thank you to Josh. Thank you to everyone who tuned in at home. Next week on the Circular Economy Show, we're going to be taking a deep dive into climate change. So we talked a bit about the 55 to 45% numbers we quoted there. If you want to find out what that's all about, then we're joined by Suki from the foundation team at the same time and the same place next week. So make sure that you subscribe to our channels wherever you're watching this on, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. And you can also find out all the information about our upcoming episodes on our website. Thank you for watching, and thank you once again to Tansy and Joss, and we'll see you next week.